Now, you mentioned that there's a lot of learning going on between organizations and governments. And we're going to speak a little bit about what we do with that learning in the future. But I want to take a step back and ask you, how did we get here? What is the origins of the COVID-19 virus, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah. Well, I guess, let's start with the fact that viruses, require a living cell, a host, in order to multiply, right? They largely consist of genetic material like either DNA or RNA wrapped in a protein coat. And these DNA and RNA sequences can change over time, accumulating modifications to the genetic code that favor the survival of that virus. And so we can look at these genetic sequences to estimate how different viruses are related and how they might have evolved over time. And we've seen an increasing number of emerging viruses, right? Viruses that are rapidly changing in terms of their geographic distribution or their incidence. And these viruses emerge often unexpectedly, amid some level of mystery about where they came from and why they're spreading, and their origins are often more complex than they might appear. And that's really where epidemiology comes in, as a scientific kind of systematic and data-driven study of the distribution and determinants, causes, risk factors, origins of health-related states and events, including diseases. In specific populations. So some viruses like West Nile, for example, are spread by insects and arachnids, right? And these are known as arboviruses. And their distribution is being highly affected by things like climate change and global warming, which is really helping with their emergence right now. A significant proportion of emerging viruses are zoonotic viruses, which are spread from animals, and these viruses are perhaps even more unpredictable because that interaction between animals and humans is critical to their spillover into human populations. So the domestication of livestock, as an example, has allowed a lot of species, all with their own viruses, to come into close contact with humans, which has created the right conditions for zoonosis. So poultry and pigs, for example, are well known for a generation of a lot of new influenza viruses. You've probably heard of avian influenza and swine flu and the like. So human encroachment into new environments and the disruption of wildlife can also lead to humans being exposed to animals and their viruses. So outbreaks of Ebola virus, for example, have often been associated with the bushmeat trade, with the primary host suspected of being fruit bats. Bats will also kind of drop partially eaten fruits and pulp, which land mammals will then feed on. And this chain of events forms, one kind of indirect means of transmission from the natural host to animal populations. And so I sit on the board of directors of the Jane Goodall Institute, and this is one of our many areas of focus is really putting an end to the bushmeat trade, including for chimpanzees in particular. And so deforestation and the sale of live wild animals or bushmeat make the emergence of new viruses somewhat inevitable, while population growth and then dense urbanization and human migration make their spread that much easier. So in the case of COVID-19, we think the virus leapt from bats to possibly an intermediate host, potentially a pangolin, and then on to humans. Pangolins are actually considered to be one of the most highly illegally trafficked mammals in the world because of their scales being used in traditional medicines, and they're also used for meat. And so this is just like the original SARS virus, which jumped from bats to civets before making its way into humans, and for MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, where the virus infected camels before before spreading to humans. And these are things that have been verified by independent studies, looking at kind of telltale features of the virus through genome sequencing and phylogenetic analysis, which show with a very high degree of probability that the virus is the product of natural evolution. Certainly ruling out any rumors of laboratory manipulation as a potential origin, which is, one rumor I know, a lot of people are hearing about. There's more certainty in bats being the reservoir for the virus, but still uncertainty around the intermediate host and whether there was an intermediate host. But a number of independent studies have identified like 96% sequence similarity between COVID-19 and a particular bat coronavirus strain. So that's highly suggestive of the source of this thing being a bat. We also know that the virus's emergence is associated from a timing and epidemiological standpoint with one of the largest wholesale seafood markets in central China, located in Wuhan, which also reportedly sold wild animals. So, and there's been some good studies and analysis. So there's this analysis of the first 41 COVID-19 patients in the Lancet, which is one of the world's most renowned scientific journals, that found that 27 of them had direct exposure to the Wuhan market. But the same analysis then also found that the first known case of the illness didn't have any connection to that market, raising questions about the possibility of a transmission event independent of the market. So there's still, research and follow-up taking place to fill in some of the gaps that we still have. And then I guess maybe just to conclude, the fact is that it's an evolutionary certainty, that more viruses will leap into humans with the potential to cause more pandemics. And this is why it's so important to have more and better surveillance systems in place, and particularly in the areas where they're most prone to emerge. And those are namely places like, deforested areas, environments under stress from climate change, locations where the consumption of wild animals is prevalent, where there are high density populations. And what that can be boiled down to is that it's just so important to ensure that we have resilient health systems in every country around the world, with strong surveillance and reporting systems in place that are really able to reach out to their rural peripheries, so that's kind of what we know so far about how it all started, and it's now in 185 countries and territories.